I am Jason Bock. I am a practice lead in application development and .NET for a company called Magenic, which is based out of the Twin Cities, Minnesota. We also have offices around the country and also in Manila. So I am going to be talking on C# 8, and since you guilted me in with Code Camp, making me feel bad that I can't come this year. A little dig, I noticed that.
Every year.
I've been there a couple of times, and it's just I think the next week I have to go to Orlando. So my wife might have an issue or two with that. But speaking of code camps, I also am part of the team that runs the Twin Cities Code Camp, which I know you've been at. I think you actually spoke at this.
Yep.
Yes, you did. Okay.
So I should submit at the same time again.
You should.
But I'm submitting here.
But we don't have a date yet for our next one, but it'll probably be in April. So anybody's interested in speaking and or coming, just watch TwinCitiesCodeCamp.com. So C# 8, that is also a little bit of information about myself. Obviously, this is a very informal group, which I like because stiff, cold groups that are all boring is not fun. People are having beer, which is great. So feel free to ask questions, get my attention, raise your hand, or you're just having soda, probably liquor, but you know. If you got questions, just raise your hand, get my attention, let me know, and I'll try to answer as best as I can. Otherwise, apparently, speaking of beer, there's going to be a couple of years later, or at least I am, somewhere tomorrow, so you can ask me there later. Otherwise, jasonb@magenic.com, and just send me an email there, and I'll answer it offline. Okay. So the slides for this presentation is on the second repo link that's there. So I have slide decks for a lot of talks I've done, this one included. So just go to that link and you'll find it. If you want to get all the demo code that I'm going to be showing, that's the first link. So either take a snapshot, write it down, or wait until the next slide or the last one, because those are also going to have the links on them. And also in the last slide, if you go into the notes section of that slide, I have links to a whole bunch of stuff related to this talk, so you can dive deeper later on. The last thing about the slide deck is sometimes you'll notice it will be on the, well, this is in the way, but when you get the slide deck, you'll see on the lower right, sometimes I have links to something that's relevant on that slide. So then take a look at that one and you'll see why that content and that URL is related. Okay, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time on language evolution, how C# got from 1 to 8. That'll be very brief, but we're going to just skim through that. The majority of the time is going to be on C# 8 features and what's coming. There's a lot of them. Actually, Seth and I were talking briefly about one feature that's probably the biggest feature in C# 8. I've actually heard some people from Microsoft call it their biggest feature ever, which is quite surprising because generics to me has always been one of the biggest features. And yet this one, it looks so simple. It's like the Ring of Power. It looks so simple, and yet, you know, well, it's not evil. It's just, you know, very powerful. So C# 8 features, and then also take a kind of brief look at what might be coming. That's all, I don't want to say speculative, because they actually, and I'll talk about this in a moment with the open source nature of C#. They have all this online, but there's nothing set in stone yet. Not even close with C# whatever is past 8. So, but they do have things out there that they're talking about. So we'll cover some of those now. All right. So has anybody been programming in C# since this time? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people. Okay. We got about what, 20 people in this room, something like that. So, okay, I'm one of them too. I've been doing C# probably since it came out, and unfortunately VB at the time as well. But you know, what is VB? Who's going to admit that they do it?
Maintenance.
Oh, good.
Maintenance, yeah.
Maintenance, yeah.
And convert it wherever I can.
Yeah, there you go. But no, you convert it into F#. That's apparently better. But yeah, C# has been around since then. That's when actually .NET was released, and Visual Basic came along for the ride, and VB.NET, and then eventually F# came in. But C# was a language that started as, and I put this data in here because for me as a developer that's been doing pretty much Microsoft stuff for my entire career, it's hard for me to sometimes remember that that's a long time ago. I mean, this is older than my kids. And you know, as I was mentioning to Seth, one of my older son is actually a freshman in high school this year. So the language is older than my son's, both sons actually. So there's a lot of history behind it. And, that can have some, language that's been around a long time can have some negative, sorry, there's a gnat that's bothering me. So I'm trying to kill it. So not just randomly hitting on the table.
Interpretive dance.
What's that?
Interpretive dance.
Yeah, no, yeah. No interpretive dance. That comes later, but, now you distracted me. History of, so it's been around for a while, so that can have some negative connotations to it, because you always have to respect the history that's been there, and sometimes when these features that are being proposed, like, well, yeah, but that would break this or wouldn't fit with what's there. But having a language that's out there for a long time too gives you stability, reliability. Also, the community around C# is rather large, so that helps as well. So let me just go through real quick the versions that were there. Not going to go through each one of these in detail, but just to give you a general feel for how this has evolved. First version was what you'd expect from an object-oriented programming language, classes, interfaces, properties, all that good stuff. Okay. Second version, as I mentioned, generics is probably one of the biggest features we ever added to C#. It's kind of weird to think of programming in C# without generics. That would suck. I don't know how Go developers do it, but they do. Though apparently Go is now has a proposal to add generics. I just read that today. So, cool. But generics really helps in terms of type safety and also expressivity. That was version 2. Version 3, I don't mention link because these are all the features that were added to essentially enable link, but you can use all these features yourself. And I'm sure people have used var, or who doesn't like var? Actually, says you can't use var. Nobody. You're not going to admit it. Okay. I love var, and sometimes there are people that don't like var. So actually, do this when you get back to your job tomorrow. I'm going to show you one little trick here. What is this? Sure. Let me zoom in here. So I love var, but if you don't like var wasn't a keyword until C#3. So you can do this. So what this is doing is essentially saying, I literally have a type called var. So if I say var customer is equal to new customer, I'm trying to assign an object of type customer to a variable which is of type var, and it won't allow that. And if you do this, I think if you actually put this in using system, or if you just leave it like that, it will have essentially like global scope, so it will kill all your code. And so just sneak that in somewhere, put it in a region, because that's the only good thing for regions. Put it in there, and then watch your team just suffer as they try to deal with getting the latest version and going, what happened? None of my code compiles. So don't do that. All right, so that was added in version 3 along with a bunch of other stuff that is really, really helpful in the link. 4, not that much. People are like, what in the world is no PIA? I don't know either. I have no clue. I've never used it, but apparently it was valuable enough for people to get it. So there's a couple features there. 5 gets even smaller, but the biggest one there was async and await. That's the way to do asynchronous programming now in C#. And I'm going to mention a feature in 8 that the language designers will say this. We stole this from Java. People can say, well, C# was basically stole Java completely. And there's some truth to that when it started. But languages steal from each other. TypeScript has added async await. I think Rust is or is about to, add concept of async and await as well. So this isn't, again, languages just steal from each other because if it's a good idea, why not? Okay. Well, from 1 to 5, all of that was closed source. And from version 6 on, everything, a lot of stuff really within Microsoft changed significantly from being closed source and kind of this, ivory tower where people would come up with the new features and then tell you at PDC or something. This is what you're getting because we know better. And that has changed dramatically in that Roslyn, the underlying compiler for C#, the language itself, all these other frameworks and packages that are related to .NET, all of it is open source now. So it's a much different world and a far, far better world than what it was about 5 years ago, okay, which is really, really cool. You can actually go to this site, which is right there, and you can see who's contributed to the language. Not surprisingly, these top two, Cyrus doesn't work at Microsoft anymore, but he did, and he still does a lot of work with the language. Jared also is on the team, and if you go down, you'll see a bunch of other people that are still, if you currently working at Microsoft, that's their day job, is to work on C# and compilers and whatnot. But if you scroll down far enough, you'll start to see people that have done contributions to the language, even if it's just like simple bug fixes outside of Microsoft. So that's cool to see. If you're interested in doing some of that stuff, you can go to the link that's there and specifically just go into the filters and look for the label community. So there are features that are been deemed as we can give this to people in the community. They're not full-time C# developers from Microsoft on the C# team. So these aren't going to be like hugely overwhelming to somebody. They want to get into it, which is good. So, and then it gives people the opportunity to start getting their feet wet into actually saying, I contributed to the C# code base. Well, how cool would that be? That'd be kind of cool to say my stuff shipped in C#, C#8 or 9, or whatever it is. Okay. So you can look for that label and say, maybe I'm going to pick this one up. And some of these are just documentation, but documentation is important. Did you kill one? Yes, good, thank you. So one less nap that we have to deal with. So yes, you can, even if documentation stuff is needed, maybe take that. That's stuff that's very desperately needed. And Docs, Microsoft.com is also much better than MSDN Docs wherever. So that's also much better. So version 6 was all done in the open, lots of cool little features. It was also interesting that they did all this out in the open. So some features that they had in preview versions didn't make it into the final one. In fact, I think there's one with structs and constructors. I can't remember what it was, but that was there until almost the final release, and then they cut it. Okay. Which is good because they got feedback from the community. They're able to see what worked, what didn't, and be able to be a little bit more fluid with that feature set. 7 continued that. A lot of cool things in there with like tuples. That's actually a very small but cool feature. Pattern matching was starting to be brought into the language, but 7 also did point releases. They never did this before. They did this because they wanted to get more features out over time rather than waiting for the big bang release every year and a half or 2 years. So they started experimenting with this with 7.1, with async main. I know that doesn't seem like a big deal, but async await, it's like turtles all the way up. Because if you call an async method, you have to wait it, then you're async, and then it just keeps going all the way up until your console app, which is what everybody writes these days in .NET. That top method was never async. Well, now you can do that in 7.1. We have an async main, which is a small thing, but a nice thing. That's what a lot of these are. 7.2 actually brought in full support for span of T, memory of T, and those types, which are awesome types. Basically allows you to do memory manipulation without having to do any allocations. So that's really cool. And then 7.3 had a bunch of other little things. Don't know if this is going to continue with 8 or 9 or whatever other features or other versions of the language will be out there, but it was an experiment and we'll see if they keep doing it. I liked it. I liked them being a little bit more, even more rapid and more fluid with getting features out there. And now we're to 8. So I don't have a watch on, but what day is it? August something? August 20, what is it? 27? So .NET Core 3 and C# 8 are going to ship September 23rd, which is the first day of .NET Conf. So they got about a month left. So the reason I say that is because the set that I have up here features is probably going to stay this way. I highly doubt something's going to be added at this point, and I highly doubt that any of these are going to be removed at this point either. But I have to say it's still technically not frozen, so it's possible that they could pull nullable reference types, though I highly doubt they would do that at this point. Okay, so it's a pretty good bet that all of these are going to stick here. Now I mentioned .NET Core C# 8. So who in here is still doing .NET Framework stuff? You're all doing .NET Core. Nobody's doing .NET Framework at all. Really? You're not lying to me. You're telling me the truth. Or you don't even do .NET. I don't know. Could be an option because this isn't a .NET group. This is like a developers group. Everything. So That could be true. All right. So who doesn't do .NET? Okay, there you go. So but the rest of you all do .NET Core is what you're telling me.
The guy who has to maintain some framework stuff.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. In VB. So. If
I
you
don't know. He has to do it. We don't touch it.
So I'm just gonna say, if you are on the framework, you're screwed. Yeah. So you're not screwed at all. The problem though with .NET Framework 4.8 is that is the last version of .NET. There are no others after that. It's how do you say this in a nice term? It's being sunsetted. It's being stabilized. It's getting security patches only. It's dead. Another way to say it. Okay. It's not going to just disappear. There's lots of apps that Microsoft has written and other people have written against .NET Framework. It ships with Windows. You can't just kill it. And like they did with Silverlight. I mean, they took that outside and just shot it. They can't do that with the framework. So that is the official last version of it. Everything, the new hotness is all in .NET Core and .NET Standard. Just, if you want to look at it that way, but definitely .NET Core. Yeah. And this picture, which came from a tweet by somebody, I forget what their actual name is, but again, the link's there, was starting to show that if you want to do stuff in C#8, you are in .NET Framework, there are some features, there are some things that you cannot do, you cannot use no matter what. One of the biggest ones is what they is calling default interface implementations. It's actually default interface members. That actually required a change to the CLR. So because of that, it wasn't, .NET Framework wasn't going to change, so that couldn't be put into .NET Framework. So C#8, if you actually try to use C#8 against .NET Framework, you'll notice that some of these, especially default interface members, you will just never be able to use. Indexes and ranges, which I'll talk, indexers and ranges, which I'll talk about later, can possibly, if you get packages made for it, sort of maybe, but that's going to take some extra work, and I don't even know if that would even work. So the point of what I'm trying to get at is all the new stuff, the performance benefits, all the new capabilities, everything is here. Okay, so get on this train because that's where things are going, especially with their announcement of build about .NET just being one .NET. .NET 5 is essentially going to be, there's still going to be Xamarin, there's still going to be .NET Core, but the amount of code that they're going to be sharing is so vast, they're going to be, like, the differences are going to be so small. And that's their path forward. Okay. All right. So enough history. Let me show you what is hopefully going to be there in a month. You'll all be there. I keep saying that, and it's like, of course, this is all going to be there. All right. So have anybody played this Matrix yet? Yeah. You're waiting with bated breath for me to show you all this stuff. I don't know. But have you at least heard about some of these things? Okay, cool. All right. So at this point, if you want to play with this stuff, you do have to be in Visual Studio 2019, their preview version. You could probably try it with the regular version of 2019 and target .NET Core 3. No guarantees if that would work or not, especially some of the language features and how they're surfaced in Visual Studio. So that's the route to go, but just keep in mind if like you use the installer, which you're installing 2017 or beyond, I think this came with 2017, right, 2015, but you know, sometimes Microsoft would say, install a preview version, give us feedback. And you're like, hell no. Because if I do, it's going to completely torch my machine and I'm going to be screwed and I can't get my work done. So the best I'm going to do is put it in a VM. I'm definitely not putting it on my machine. Okay? But as you can see here, I've got preview, still have 2017 on my machine in 2019. Okay? And I've been doing this now for a while and just updating when these modify buttons update. And you know, so far I've not had anything just completely die out. They've done a really good job of keeping all these versions separate, even with any registry settings that they still have to do. They're all isolated from each other. So that's really good. Okay. So you have to install the preview version. I believe that would install the version of .NET Core that you need, or you can just go to the .NET Core site and get the SDK. I think they're up to preview 8. I have preview 7 on my machine. The demo still seemed to work, so I was not even going to try to update it. is funny. So that might refresh. Okay. What I'm going to do to demonstrate all these is just go through the main method here and just keep commenting and uncommenting methods. It's obviously not the way I write real code, but just for demo purposes, so you can go through them. So the first one is patterns. Okay. And I don't know about you, but the switch statement always felt like this, and it really was, a holdover from C days. And it felt like ancient and ugly, and quite honestly, a lot of times I didn't even remember how to use it because I'd be using like ifs and else's, other things. Switch always just felt kind of weird to me. So it just never was something I did. Other languages like F sharp, like Rust, like Pony. Yes, there is actually a language called Pony. And I just found out about a month or two ago, and I'm quite enamored by it. It's a really kind of cool language. They have pattern matching. They also have all those languages have much better type systems than C# has. Quite honestly, if you look at like TypeScript or these other languages, if you look at what you can do in types, and then you come back to C# and you start like crying a little bit because you realize you don't have as much expressivity as other languages do. And pattern matching is where it shows. Pattern matching was added in 7. They've upped it a little bit, started adding more features. It's nice. There are some cases where it's kind of cool, but I'm still kind of, we need to have more in C# to really make this shine. But just to show you what you can do now with pattern matching. So I'm going to give you kind of the canonical, you have an animal and you have different kinds of animals, which quite honestly is a little bit of a lame example. I'll explain why in a moment, but it'll illustrate the point of how this feature works. So I have a function that gets me animals depending upon what I roll, a 0 or a 1. Either I get a new dog or a new cat. And by the way, I ranted about this on Twitter, I think either yesterday or today. This is what I hate about the ternary operator, because both of these return a type that implements iAnimal. If I actually go to that, you can see both these classes implement it. But the way the ternary works is that it doesn't put any logic in to say, do these have a shared type? Okay, so you have to be returning something from each part of the ternary to say they're exactly the same. They're both ints or they're both strings, or they're, it can't look at that and go, well, what's common between dog and cat? It doesn't know, so it gives you an error. But if I cast one of them to iAnimal, then it works. I love ternaries, but this is like the one thing that kind of sucks about it. I hope they would. I've heard reasons why they can't do this, but I really wish they would because it would just make more sense to me at least. So anyway.
Would there be a non-ternary way to implement this that
If
would
else.
read more nicely and avoid this
Well,
random cast on one side of the branch?
So, thank you for the passive aggressive.
It seems like you were also dissatisfied with this code as such.
Well, okay.
More than that.
The other way to do it, or another way to do it, because there's probably 50 ways to do this, and maybe over beers we can come up with the worst way to do this.
We're not there already.
Wow.
It's Allegro.
Yeah, I might throw this cup in.
Better be empty.
You probably get a plus.
Yeah, I gotta wait because there's still some in there. So another way is just to make this a method with a body and then have if new random 2 is 0, then in there have your dog, else your cat, and that would work and have the function return an iAnimal. I have gotten really hooked on methods that use expression body syntax. That's a little arrow here. It's not a lambda, but I shouldn't touch the screens because it's probably gonna make them come up and I'll be screwed. Well, that was just a door. Okay. They were not being very friendly when I first got here. They went up and down. Now they finally work, which is good. So I really like this terse syntax. I just do. And again, this is kind of like preference. Like some people may not like this. It's kind of like vars or tabs or spaces. We all know tabs are correct. Okay? So just, if you like spaces, you can leave.
Take my beer and go home.
You know what though, about tabs and spaces, I always say it's kind of a joke because honestly, I don't care as long as your editor config says 1. I don't care. I will code in either one. I actually read a tweet that talked about why tabs are actually good for people that are autistic. And my boys are both diagnosed as autistic. They're high functioning. So when I read that, I'm like, okay, this actually matters to me a little bit. people that are autistic actually want their screens and not just like the color, but the spacing between fonts and how much space is between lines. It really, really matters to them, some people. And it's like, oh, okay, that actually, you know, it brings a little bit of seriousness to it, but that matters. And with tabs, there's reasons why for people that are autistic, they have a lot more freedom to set things up exactly the way they want it. So, you know, it works better for them. So that's also why spaces suck. So there you go. So that's why I like this. So getting away from the demo code, and we both agree that the cast and the ternary sucks. Can we at least agree on that? Okay, good. But this is more terse than I like it. So if you don't like it, I take PRs and I also reject them.
You will evaluate and close them accordingly?
Yeah. I actually had somebody give me on one of my presentations once a PR because one of my demos was, admittedly, I didn't put a lot of time into the names. I had things like I thing and it really sucked. And so he actually put in one that had better names than it. I accepted that one. I have the one you're thinking of. So I get an animal back, and then I also randomly look for the mood of one of the animals, and then I want to print out what they talk. Now, of course, real world, those animals would speak for themselves. They'd have a speak method, something like that. But I'm doing it here because I wanted to show you switch. Notice that the switch does not look like the switch of days gone by. I'm first switching on, does the animal, is it a type of dog? Okay. And if it is a type of dog, I could assign it to a variable. Notice I'm using an underscore there. And C#7, the underscore actually became what's known as a discard. So you can have multiple discards like you're seeing there, which is basically telling C#, I don't care about what's returned or anything there. It doesn't matter to me. So I don't need different variables of I don't careness. Okay, a discard works just fine. So all I'm looking at is in this switch, is it a dog? And if it's a dog, I'm going to say, whoa. If it's a cat, I can also do when. So I can do pattern matching with when. So the conditional there is cat, when the mood is 0, then just do meow. Otherwise, do hiss. Okay. And if I did this right, and I comment that out and I take that away, yes, the switch, zoom in on that. See that? So it's basically saying the switch expression does not handle all possible inputs because, if I go back down here, well, what happens if mood was not equal to 0? Then the switch doesn't have anything to fall down to. Okay. So this is basically saying, if you got to this point, then okay. But it's not that point either. You don't have to go from most specific to least specific. I'll put, I'm actually going to leave it off, comma, and I'm going to put that there, put a comma there. And that doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. And oh, the patterns, okay, that it would work if this wasn't the most general one. Okay? If there was like a different class that implemented animal, but because that one is basically the catch-all of everything, that would work. But with switches, you don't have to go from most specific to least specific if you don't want to. That is possible. Yeah. So whatever comes out of that switch statement will be a string. So when I run this code, you'll see that I'll get random animal meows. No, what did I just do? Don't you hate that when you do like some random thing on your keyboard, you're like, wait a minute, that was not what I meant at all. And then you're like, what did I just do? Yeah.
Definitely what your cat meant to do,
What's that?
distract you.
Yeah. Run again. I'm saying run again. Woof. I should get it. Come on, there's gotta be more than, there we go. Can I get the hiss? There we go. Okay, so the point is that the switch row return will give you a value, which is a string, and that's what I'm doing the console out, right? Yeah. Okay, this is good. Part of this I don't like because a lot of the examples that I've seen are saying, oh, you're getting a base type, animal is an I animal. So now I'm going to say if it's a specific type, but from a design standpoint, I don't necessarily like that because what happens if I don't know what the subclass is? You know, that's starting to leak in information that maybe I don't know what it is. Also, the fact that we don't have union types in C#. I'd love, to do something like this, where I have a divide method, which returns a result. And if I could actually get a result, I'll return it. Otherwise, instead of throwing an exception, I'll just return an error. Okay. And I try to do this as a switch, and as you can see, it gets really, really messy in a hurry because I either have to look for a result or an error, but the switch expects your expression to return a value. So I can't just say console out write line because that doesn't return a value, that's void. So I can't put that in the other side of the switch statement. I have to like somehow fake it to think, oh, I'm calling a method that returns a none, which is some type I made up, and then discard it over here. So this isn't as elegant if you look at languages like Rust or F#, their match keyword would look, and that code would look a lot better than what this looks here. Okay. So there is an example I'm going to show you in a moment where pattern matching does actually come into play in a library that I've used as well. So there are places where I think this is actually going to be beneficial depending on what you're doing in your code. Okay, so I don't want to just dismiss it outright. And hopefully in future versions of C# they just keep building on this and making this even more expressive. Okay. All right, the big one, which is nullable reference types. So Seth was telling me, I want to see if I build my code for C#8 and turn on nullable, turn on this feature, and how much of my code is going to break. Because a lot will, I guarantee you a lot will. This is a very simple feature, but it has far-reaching effects. Essentially what this is we have nullable value types. So I can say int question mark, that means it might have a value, and it actually descends from nullable of t. Well, now in C#8, they're adding nullable reference types. You might hear them as NRTs. Okay. So it's kind of the same thing where I can annotate a type and say it's like arguments to methods or fields or properties could be null. Okay. So in this case, I have a person, and let's actually uncomment this so that it hopefully works. And it does. I get the length of the name back and then also the ID. And I haven't shown you what person looks like just yet. One thing to keep in mind with this feature is you have to turn it on. It is off by default. And this is, I think, the first language feature in C# to ever be a feature that you have to opt into. If they didn't do this, then everybody upgrades to C#8 and everybody goes to a different language because it would be extremely noisy. You want to be able to opt into this. So if you go to the C# project file, you'll notice that you have to say nullable enable. Okay? Or you can turn them on individually in files. I'll show you how to do that in a moment. But you have to enable it in some way, shape, or form. This is for the entire project. Now, that'll make them all warnings, but I like to live on the edge. So in all my projects, I treat warnings as errors. This is not by default, it's false. But what happens when we hit a yellow light?
Speed up.
Yes. You don't stop. Nobody stops. You floor it, okay? Maybe when you get a red light.
No doubt.
But no, if it down there says build succeeded, nobody's looking at the error list. Okay, you're not looking at the warnings. You're committing and going home is what you're doing. Okay, and there might be some things in there that you really, really should address. So I turn these on by default. Okay, that's one thing I wish C# would have done from day one, but oh well, we're here. Okay, so this will make it so that if I do have any null reference type errors or warnings, they will actually show up as errors. But this is the one to flip it out. Okay, so let's actually go to the person definition here. Now you notice I have nullable disable here. I'm going to actually take these out. You see nullable enable. So you can put these, actually I don't think you need to have matching ones. You just have one at the top and say enable, and then that would just enable it for an individual file. But now they've taken those out, and the project has nullable enable. You'll notice that name has a squiggle. Okay. So if I hover over that and zoom in, you can see it says the non-nullable property name is uninitialized. Okay, because this is a getter setter, it's mutable. And I bet a lot of people have POCOs. I don't see a lot of objects, something like this, where you have a getter and setter, and then you use an object initializer to set it up. That's one of many areas where this is going to start to bark at you, because it's possible you could create a new instance of person, never set the name, and now name is null. And that's what could cause problems. That's what NRTs are all about. For one, trying to make you more aware of when you could have nullables, and for you to be more explicit about when you could accept a null value or not. Okay? People think that this feature is all about getting rid of null, and it's really getting rid of unwanted null reference exceptions. That's what's really trying to get rid of. Okay? It's not saying never use null. It's about being explicit about the intent of your design. That's what this is. Okay? So this could possibly be null. That's one problem. Okay? So let's share it possibly. Let's actually disable it for now, because there's a couple ways you could fix this. You could just say, put a constructor on here, make the properties read only, and then you'd be forced to actually set it and all that other stuff. But this is all the compiler and analyzing your code and figuring out when things could go wrong. Okay. So if I took out this question mark here, and I give it a second, what should happen? It's not. What am I doing wrong here? Let me take that out here. And then that's initial. Oh, I know what it is. Sorry. I uncommented that code. Should it be smart enough? No, it's not, because it knows that I don't care in this case. Okay. And why are you not? It should know that I don't have that assigned. Okay. It's the beard. It's affecting my way of thinking. All right. You're going to fail. Of course, you're going to fail because the Siri. Yes. See, read the error messages. They're actually helpful. It's expressing my intent that this could be null. Okay, so that's what I wanted. And now I come back here, and because I did not set the name property to something, because I commented the code out, now we have something here to say dereference of a possibly null reference. So the compiler's smart enough to go, oh, this could possibly be null. Okay. Now there's a couple things you could do. One of them, which is what I had there before, which is to do that question mark dot. I'm just saying if the thing on the left is not null, then do the thing on the right. Otherwise, just don't do it. Essentially, that won't help here. Well, it will help here because what I will get is just nothing. It's the question. The comma doesn't have anything before it. So basically, it just says, no, you had null here. But if I take this off, I should get the squiggle back. But maybe there's a case where I know it could not be null. This is not. This feature is not 100% foolproof. There are cases like if I say var names is equal to new string of 3, and then I said like console out right line. Whoops. Right. What am I doing? That was weird. Okay. Notice the compiler doesn't bark, but you know that that's going to be a problem, especially if I do like length, because that's null. It's not assigned. All the elements in there are initialized to be their default values, which, oh, now you're going to prove me wrong. Because it's not an int to char. Okay. Fine. Var x is equal to that. How do you like me now? There you go. Okay, good. But it doesn't know that. So in that case, you might say, well, I know that this value would not be null. Maybe somewhere within the code that I've written, here in some of these lines, I have set all these up. So what you can do is here, put an exclamation point here. Now the official name for this is the null forgiving operator. Yeah. I like the name that they actually came up with Microsoft, which is called the damn it operator. So this is basically saying right here, damn it, I know name is not null, so call length. Obviously, you can see why official documentation, you couldn't use that. I get offended, but I kind of actually like it. They call this the Elvis operator, because apparently there's like two eyes and the squiggle is like his hair with the curl. That's stupid. I don't like that. But damn it, this, actually, when I write code like this sometimes, I'm like, yes, damn it. No, it's not null. Okay. But what's going to happen in this case? Null reference exception. Okay. So this doesn't stop you from getting these. Okay. I basically took off the safety brakes and everything by saying the bang and then dot. Okay. But if you're sure that you know more than the compiler, you can do the dot or the bang there and then get rid of the potential error. Now, the next thing I'm going to show is if you do anything with reflection, and I was talking to Seth about this before the meeting. I mentioned that nullable value types, they have a base type, nullable of t. If you ever look, there's actually, if you do int question mark, it is actually nullable of int. Okay. There is nothing like that, nullable reference types. You'll notice in this code here, I used to be able to do this, but I can't anymore. They updated stuff so that putting in type of string question mark, that doesn't even work because that's not a type. It's not actually a type in and of itself. It's an annotation. Okay. So what that means is it's metadata. So if you really want to know if a type is nullable, it's quite the adventure. Okay. So if I want to go look for a parameter from this method here, and this is some really stupid long generic, okay, but I did this on purpose just because I needed a long generic. Okay. You can say things like, by the way, a byte array, which the whole key value pair, the value would actually be potentially a null. You could also say like string question mark array. So you're expecting that the array members wouldn't be null, but or the array wouldn't be, no, the values in the array could be null, but not the array itself. It can get really, really complicated if you want it to be. Okay. By the way, notice that get method here, I put the bang there because a lot of the, I shouldn't say a lot, but a fair amount of actual VCL runtime APIs from .NET are getting attributed now with the question. So if you actually look at get method and I zoom in on that, you'll see it's actually a method info question. Because it's possible that that could actually return null. Okay. But in my case, I know it's not going to be, so I know better. Okay. And then I get the first parameter. Now to figure out if it's actually a nullable or not is quite the mess. Let me run this. No, not that. I got to flip the thing I'm calling here. Okay. And then let's do that. Okay. So you're going to see a bunch of crap. That's actually the full name of the generic of that parameter, which is really, really messy. Okay. But then you'll see nullable attribute flags 11102. Okay. So if you look at this parameter and you say dictionary, list, string, key value pair, GUID, byte, all these things, there's a document out there from Microsoft that says there are attributes called nullable attribute and also nullable runtime, or I'm sorry, nullable context attribute that are put in your code. You'll see them, and they're actually not attributes that you could find. You notice that my link statement here is saying I want to find all the attributes on my parameter where the name is equal to nullable attribute because that doesn't exist. That's created and put into your assembly at runtime, but you can't reference it like what I want to do here. This is not a safe way to do it. Okay, but that's what's put in there. And it's like, holy crap, that took a while to figure out. And then if you want to find out, well, which ones are they, you actually get either an array from the argument type, all of that attributes constructor. So if it is an array, hey, look, I'm using the switch statement to do this simple piece of code, which is not simple at all. I have to pull all these values out to make them a byte array. Or if it's not, I just create a new byte array and get the value. Okay. The point of why I'm showing you this is like the vast majority of your code, you will never care about, do I need to figure out if a type is null or not? It's only if you're starting to do anything with reflection and looking at your types, then you will have to care about this stuff. And it's not pretty. I hope that they somehow add APIs on top of this or around this to make it much easier to say, hey, if I've got an argument, is this part, you saw 5 values there, they're all representing parts of this whole type here, and which things are nullable and which are not, and which could never be nullable. Give me some method I can call that just tells me, is annotated nullable or something like that, because trying to do this on your own, believe me, I have to do this for a library called Brock's, which is a mocking library I wrote, and I've updated it to support nullable reference types, so I had to go through all this stuff, and to do it across the board is really, really painful, but it's possible. So just be thankful if you never have to go there, then you don't care, okay? But just this in and of itself, with having different types of properties and arguments that could or could not be null, you can see why this is an opt-in thing, because this could be, if you just turn it on for everything, you might be sitting there for a while trying to update all your code so that you no longer get errors, not warnings, because you're all going to use error. All right, enhanced usings. This is kind of like the movie Cloud Atlas, which if you've never seen, then you won't know what I'm saying, but either you love Cloud Atlas or you absolutely hate it. Okay? I've just seen people either say, I think the movie's awesome, or this is the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen in my life and I hate it. Okay, it's kind of like this. Look at this line of code here. Okay. Where's the block? It's the method scope in this case. The block is actually everything after it in the scope that it's in. In other words, it's kind of like if I put the braces here and here. Okay. Sort of. Okay. But I don't have to if I don't want to. Yeah. So they basically made it so you don't have to put the blocks around usings anymore. You can still do it if you want. That's what the second using is there. Or I could just say, you know what? Give the little refactoring and say use simple using, and there that goes. Now this using is doing the same thing it did before. It's those 2 lines of code. This using is all of this. Okay. So now that you've seen this, do you like it? Yes or no?
I think I'll like it.
I think I'll like it. That's what they said in Stockholm. I think I'll like it. I honestly, I'm still on the fence with this. There's part of me that goes, I can see where this is simple, less parentheses or curly braces. But it also, I don't know if it reads very well. That's why I don't like it.
Yeah, like
It's
introducing
gonna make
new
debugging
programmers.
a pain.
Potentially, yes.
I'm gonna
And-
comment on a code review of it, like, no, you did this wrong.
Yeah, but it's right.
Someone's gonna link me docs.
You're like, no, you're wrong.
I think it's fine in simple cases, but I know it's gonna be misused, and that's what makes me cringe.
Yeah.
Yep. I was about to say just like regions, but regions are bad anyway, so it's used all the time. I've never misused any regions. I'm sorry, I should not rant about regions.
That's what.
I am one of those developers that if an if statement has just 1 line of code, I will still put a block around it because I find it easier to read it that way. Okay. So that's why I look at this and go, I don't like this. Okay. Yeah.
What effect does it have if you put it down? Is everything after it, or?
So everything after it in that scope.
So a third using,
So if I had a third, well, let me do this. If I put this, just threw another one in here and then said, go simplify that, then this using are those lines. Okay. So it's everything after the using within the block that it's in. Okay. This is why I don't like it, because it can be a little confusing. And by a little, I mean a lot. So if I run this, you'll see within the disposable service, still, now I go into the rough struct, I'll explain why the rough struct is there in a moment, still within its scope, then that gets disposed, and then that gets disposed. So the behavior is what I expect. Okay. Now, what is this? I don't implement iDisposable, but I have a public deploy dispose method there. That's correct. Okay. So again, something to have to keep in mind. When you see this is actually correct. If you say it's wrong, somebody's going to send you the docs on it. There you go. The reason why this was put in here is because it has to do with allocations and structs, and when you try to call a method on them, you can potentially get a box. So what they're trying to do here is say if you match the pattern or what I'm expecting for a dispose method, as long as you have that there, that's okay. Deconstruct methods, if you use tuples, you can have a deconstruct method on your type. As long as it is a public void, word you construct, and then all the things after it are out parameters, you can assign a tuple to that object and it will deconstruct it using the else. So there's more of these things popping up in C# that are like, you don't have to have, it doesn't have to have like the type match there. As long as it matches a pattern, we're good with it. Now the docs supposedly say this should work for any type, but if I change this to a class, it works. Of course it would. Why wouldn't it? Oh, no, the build errors. Type used in a using statement must be implicitly convertible to disposable, okay, which this isn't. So for right now, it seems like this is only useful, or you can use it for ref structs, okay? But maybe in the future, this will be for any type that you can just have a dispose method on it and it will just work, okay?
Would you think of that as like a weakening of the type system?
Is it a weakening of the type system? I don't know if it's a weakening of the type system. When I start looking at languages like TypeScript, which their type system is based on structural typing, where C# is nominal typing. And when you have nominal typing, when you see structural typing, you wish you had structural typing, because structural typing is so much more powerful. This isn't so much a, I don't think it's a weakness, because it's just saying if you're in a using statement, as long as you have a method that's public, it's void, and it has dispose, and it takes no arguments, I will call that in the finally block that's generated for a using statement.
Is there this incentive for inheriting from my disposable in the?
What's that?
Is there like, can you not inherit from my disposable in the ref struct case?
I don't know if you can. Again, this is one of those technical issues where if you, yeah, it's not gonna let me do it. Ref structs cannot implement interfaces. So there you go. That's why you can't do this. So yeah, that's ref structs and some things that they did with ref returns and other things in C# 7.1 and 7.2, really for systems where you have to be really conscious of allocations with structs. This is one of them. But if you want to dispose of them, you couldn't. You can implement disposable. Now you can.
The usage will still be type checked. Like if you change how dispose is spelled,
Yeah, they won't
using
work.
won't check it. So it's still strongly checked.
Yeah, I mean, the compiler is going to say you don't fit the pattern. So if I do this class is fine. The struct is fine because it doesn't care. But over here, I'm getting an error now because it's going to probably say something like type using statement must be implicitly convertible to disposable or implement a suitable dispose method.
So it's still strongly checked.
Yeah, I don't want to say strongly checked because it has to do with typing and it's not really typing. Well, it's typing, but not typing.
But I just meant like the compiler.
Yes, the compiler, it'll enforce it to the.
I think the idea is if you care enough about performance to use ref structs, you probably don't want the box in too.
That's part of it, yeah. So, yep. Personally, I would like it if they did it for every type, any kind of type in C#. Just said, take the training wheels off and let you do it for everything. But apparently, you still can't do that just yet.
Because I assume that's mainly a performance feature.
It is.
Yeah.
You can do a ref return from a method in C#. So you can return like a reference to a field that you have in your object that is a struct like a vector, or maybe a matrix that's huge. If you didn't have that, every time you return a value from a method, you copy it. If you can do a ref return, then you're getting it by reference. So then you save memory because you're not doing double copy, you're not doing that copy there. You have to be careful though, because when you do a ref return, you're actually getting a reference to can't be something in the method because that gets off the stack once the method goes away. So it has to be field, but now you have access to the inner workings of the object's field. So there's a trade-off there. It's again, when you really care about that kind of performance. Yeah. All right, let me move to some async stuff. So I have to comment out my main method here. I have to go to the async main method. We're going to go to asynchronous disposables. So you could not do this before, but you can do it now in C#8. So I can await a disposition. That didn't make sense. I can await a dispose call. If I use, I async disposable. So that's a new interface that was added, and now you can have dispose async. So yes, it seems like it's a small thing, but it's actually really useful because if you're trying to like close a connection and a using statement and the connection had a way to close it asynchronously, you couldn't do that until before C#8. Okay. And the more you do async IO, the more you really, really want to take advantage of it. So now you can. I can actually, as long as I implement async disposable, then yes. So you're going to ask the question, well, can I have dispose async on a ref struct and asynchronous dispose it that way? I can try it after I'm done. Yeah, I'll try that because I've never even tried that before. It just came into my head. I should have shut up and not said anything. But now I did, and so I'm committed. We'll come back to that later. So if I run this, you'll see it gets disposed. Everything works just fine. This was added because there's another feature that came into play, which is asynchronous streams. I don't know when it was, Seth, but I know it came here a couple of years ago. I did a talk on reactive extensions. Okay. So if you were not there for that incredibly exciting talk, I don't know if it was exciting, it was a talk, I can guarantee you that. I talked about reactive extensions, which is this kind of idea of instead of me saying to a database, give me all the values at once, especially when I don't know when those values are going to be produced, like a stock ticker value, I can say, here's an observe, here's something where I want to observe, tell me when it's changed. And when stock values change, and it would just keep pushing those values to me. Ironically, RX is really used a lot in the JavaScript world, even though it originated in .NET. So that's a very powerful idea. This asynchronous streams is kind of in between. So it's where I know I need to pull a set of data, but I don't know exactly when all of those values are going to be produced. Okay, but I know I'm going to get 10 or something like that. There's going to be a set. I may just want to say, instead of giving me 5 megabytes of data, you're going to give me all the data, but you're going to give it to me in chunks. Okay, so I want to stream that data over do it over a stream, but I want to do it asynchronously. Okay, you can do this now. Sure, big. So you'll notice here that I have a for each on an asynchronous random class, except it's being awaited. Okay, and if I look at the definition of asynchronous random, it implements async enumerable. Technically, you don't have to do that as long as you have a method there that matches a signature. Yeah, so it's not type check. If you say matches a signature, then that actually is probably, that's the way it's okay. Where I say I want to get an enumeration, but it's going to be asynchronous, then notice I can still do everything I did before. I can have a yield return and say, give me the next value. And then I'm just faking a delay by using task delay, but I'm awaiting it. Okay. So when I run this code, you're going to get values. We're going to get 10 of them, but they're going to be stuttered depending upon what their random time is. So this obviously means that you need async streaming APIs set up for this to really be taken advantage of. And I would assume over time, as this feature, more and more people get this feature in their code, they'll be able to start creating these APIs and you start actually doing asynchronous streaming in your code. Especially if you're doing like reading from a database, you don't want to say, give me everything at once. I want to read parts of it in chunks. I could see where this would be extremely helpful and hope, maybe ease up on bringing everything over the wire at once, especially if I don't know if I can get it all at once. Okay. All right, so that is asynchronous streams, ranges and indexes, or indices, that thing. So Buddha here is programmed in Python. Okay, I haven't. You're gonna have to tell me if this is actually something that looks kind of Pythonish or not. All right, so I have an array here that has like the first digits of pi, okay? And, okay, oh, for a second, I'm like, where is the scroll bar at the bottom? Remember I said before that there was some keystroke I hit that did something weird? It actually turned off, or it turned on word wrapping, which is like, how do I turn that off? I go to Control Q, word wrap. And it just tells me where to go for the option. Right? Oh yeah, oh, I see. Control EW, and then it flips up, and there's my bar. So now I know what I did wrong. Okay, cool. But that's actually a good illustration. Right at the top, you see search Control Q. If you ever want to know any keystroke, any feature, anything in Visual Studio, just hit Control Q and start typing in what you think you want to look for. And it will search for that. And it's actually really, really powerful. Okay? That's like one of the main keystrokes you need to know in Visual Studio. So you can learn a whole bunch of them after that. All right, as I showed you, I did word wrap, so cool. All right, values, have an array here, pi values, but notice how I'm actually getting the values from that array. I can say, give me everything. I can say values dot dot. So that gives me all the values in the array. Actually, let me run this, and then we'll kind of switch back and forth. From the second to the fifth, exclusive. Okay, that's important. This is an exclusive value on the right. Okay, so I should see 2, 3, and 4, or 4, 1, and 5. And I do. Yeah. Everything after the third, including the third, because the one on the left is inclusive. Left is inclusive, right is exclusive. If you use the random class, this actually makes perfect sense. Because if you want to get a range from a random value, the next is inclusive first and exclusive on the range for the second value. Okay. But just to beat that in your head, that's what the two mean. Okay, so this should be, including the third, it should be 1 because we're 0 based. Yes. Okay. What the heck is this hat syntax thing here? This is called an index. Okay. So this is saying everything except the last. So I should see everything except the 5. That's what I see there. So that's what an index does. Now you might say, why didn't it say 0? And I will say reasons. This is a very technical reason that the people from C# will tell you why doing hat 0 is actually causes all sorts of problems. And I just kind of went, okay, cool, I'm just gonna believe it. Okay, so hat 1 means the last thing, okay? Or I can say just the last one. So I should have a 5 there. Just the last, yes I do, okay? Or the second to last, or the third to last, okay? So these ranges and index, this range and index syntax has been added to make it easier to kind of get into arrays and find values and not have to like do from here, where there, or do some complicated length things. Okay? So pretty cool. These are all actually literal types. So you can see I can declare them here and say, want a new range or a new index. And I can pass them into the array like this, and that also will work just fine. Okay. So is this like Python or not? I have no idea. No. Yes. Okay. I'll take your word for it.
No hats.
No hats.
Yeah, do you know why they had to use a caret instead of a minus?
Caret instead of minus. No, I don't know. So if you don't know where your hat is on your keyboard, maybe it's the 6. Actually, I've been told. I've been watching some streams from a guy named Jonathan Blow, who wrote this game called The Witness. Haven't. It's an awesomely fun puzzle game. It's like one of the best games I've ever played. He's writing his own language because if you don't like C++, the obvious answer is to write your own language. That's what he's doing. And he was using the hat syntax somewhere for some experiments, and I think he was told don't do that because in some European keyboards, I guess the hat is actually hard to find. It's that one or the tilde or the backtick. It's one of those. Apparently they're kind of a pain. I didn't know this. In any event, why not a minus? I don't know. You just use the hat. So yes. Well, I don't know if you can actually say like here, give me everything from -1 to 5. I don't think that actually.
You could say value 0, right? That would be added as 0, but you could, I think, also say -1. Never be valid, but
Right,
Syntactically, it's valid.
maybe,
You'd have to distinguish, the compiler would have to distinguish between
potential
a range and
Yeah.
integer.
Well, because then in the actual range here, you notice that it takes an index, which there is probably an implicit conversion from an index here, which is an int value. Okay, so int can be negative. So that's probably why, but this is just speculation. Yeah. One thing to keep in mind though, all the stuff I showed you above are all copies. So when I did those ranges and indices, I was getting copies of the values within the array. And to show this, I've got range copy here. If I change the first value to 22, you'll notice though that the original array is still 3. Okay. So I mentioned this thing called spans. You can use a span here and say values as span with the range syntax. And now you're actually getting a literal window into that array. You've not done any allocations here. You're just saying, I've got a span across the first 3 values of the array. So if I change on that slice, the first index, you'll notice that on the original array values, it actually changed to 22. Okay. So if you want to use this syntax and you want to prevent yourself from doing any copies, just remember to do as span. Okay.
Does the range implement IEnumerable? So you can like just do a simple for loop on there.
Does it implement IEnumerable? It implements IEquatable, but not IEnumerable. So no, it's literally just meant to be here to here.
I was just saying like if you want to do a for each 0 to 10.
Yeah,
use that compact syntax.
I think that was proposed. I don't know if that's actually, let me see. For I equals 0, 10.
I was thinking more like a for each RI in, and then a range.
Well, for one thing, this isn't, yeah, that's definitely not right. For each in.
And then you have clear with
I,
right around it.
well, we're totally,
Yeah,
guessing.
no, I just, that's what I
Not that.
was curious about.
So I think that again, there was at least a proposal, I think, to do that. Apparently it's not there yet, or it's there and I'm just typing in the wrong syntax. Okay, I want to make sure I get done because we're supposed to be done at 8:30, right? Yes, okay. Default interface members. This is also something that may either make you go, "Woo, that's cool," or I just vomited in my mouth a little bit. So let's just jump to the classes here instead of running this to show you what you can kind of do. So iService, it's an interface and it has a static member and it also has a method that has an implementation in it.
Who here has to change their interview questions?
Well, there's that, yes. You go up to somebody, you're like, so can an interface have static members? No, they can't. Yes, they can. Out. You don't even talk about that. One could do that, or you could, maybe not. But you could trick people that way, yes. So default interface members, most people think of that new feature as this, which is all about versioning. If you're at version 1 of an interface, and then you have version 2 of the interface, which added new members, you break the world because they don't implement it, and then they have compilation errors or runtime errors or whatever. Things are just bad. So what you can do now is have an interface, have methods that have an implementation. So long as that implementation, you can't have data, you can't have state on the interface, so there are no fields. Okay, you can't do that. But I can have a whole method body here. I just wrote this, but I could do this where I actually end up calling the static method that's on my interface, which again, that's also kind of a mind twist because that was never allowed before, and now you can do that. So if you look at the feature for default interface members, and if you notice on all these methods here, I have a link to all of the markdown documents that describe all these features in detail. There's even more that you can do with default interface members than just what I'm showing here. Okay. And if I ran this code, you'd see that you don't have to implement that method. It will just call the base one. So long as you actually say iService, and then it will call it. Yeah. So Do you like that feature or not? So some people are like purists. Interfaces should not have implementations. They should not have static members. This is evil. But this is something they borrowed from Java, because apparently Java lets you do this. And again, it's primarily for versioning, but there's other really goodness things to it as well. Null coalescing assignments, really simple. Local methods were added to C#7, so you can have a method in a method, and you can do that as much as you want if you really, really want to. But I have two methods here, one that does return a value and one that doesn't. Here is me grabbing the one that's going to give me a null. If I wanted to do something like the value is null, then go to some other thing that I know is not going to be null, which should give me a value. You had to do it this way. Now you can do it this way. So what this is saying is, if name is null, then call get name to get me another value. If it was not null, then just keep name the way it is. So, little syntax there to make things nice. By the way, a couple quick ones, and then I'm going to move to the future stuff. Verbatim interpolated strings. So we got interpolated strings. We've had verbatim strings for God knows how long. Interpolated strings, which is the $sign there, is a way for you, instead of having like string format 0, 1, 2 in your string, you can actually put the value directly in the string, the way you're seeing it here, and that works just fine. But if you want to have a verbatim interpolated string, and what I mean by verbatim is if I did this, that's literally going to put a line feed carriage return in that string. That's what the verbatim does. Okay. You could not do this in C#7, which is I have the @ in the string the other way. And I know you've been begging for this. Well, I have to admit, sometimes I just don't even remember. I'm like, I know I need an interpolated verbatim string, and I don't remember which one goes first. Now it doesn't matter. You can do either. Okay. And I mentioned local functions. So C#7 added this, but you could, as you can see here, capture values outside of the function if they were within the closing function. Sometimes you may like this. Sometimes this can lead to some behaviors that can be a little confusing. So what you can do is create a static local function. And the way local functions work is they actually end up just being private methods on that type, but only the function that defined the local function can actually see it from a compilation standpoint. Okay. So these are all instance, these are all static, but the point is I can't do this anymore. I'll actually get an error telling me that I cannot contain a reference to value. So what I'm actually noticing now in some of the latest preview versions of 2019 is you're getting, you're actually getting, one for int here? I think I do. Birds method, no. Black body for local function, no. I thought I was starting to see some errors or informational things come up to tell you, you really want to make, oh, I know. Let me take this, put it here, and that there. Now I think what it should tell me is, yeah, make the local function static, because before I was capturing it. And so it couldn't just make it static because I would have made an error. But if it notices that your local function doesn't have any captures, then it will offer a refactoring to make it a static, which is really what you should do. All right. So that is essentially all the C#8 features. There are some things that are works in progress. I have them as these markdown documents. Don't ask them about stack alloc and nested comments or nested content. Texts are, I looked at the documentation for it, I'm like, I can't figure it out. I don't know what it is. There are some things they list on their site for potentially maybe C#8 dot something, maybe not. This idea of caller expression attributes, target type new. This is actually kind of nice because if you're making a, this should be a lowercase c. But if I'm making an array of customers, I don't have to say new customer. I can just say new because it knows it's a customer. So again, it's a little bit less typing that you have to do. Generic attributes, you can make generic attributes in IL. C# can consume them. You just can't create them in C#. And this feature would essentially surface that from IL and let you do this in C# directly. Yeah. Default and deconstruction, that's a very edge case in terms of how tuples work with default values. And then another one where the ordering of some keywords doesn't matter anymore. Parameter null checking is actually cool. So this is kind of one of these things that are looked at now that we have nullable reference types and all that stuff, is to say, instead of you doing this, is, hey, maybe we just allow you to say, we know string s bang, so that's not null. So you generate the code compiler to do that if check and throw the argument null exception for. So these aren't coming with C#8. These are just things that are proposed that will maybe happen sometime after C#8. Okay. Now, what about the future? Okay. Before C#6, this was literally looking in a crystal ball because this stuff wasn't available publicly. Now it is. For 4 years, all this stuff is out in the open. Okay. So there's a lot of them out there. In fact, I should have taken the link from my Twitter feed. I forgot to do that before I got here. But there's actually on one of their GitHub repos, I don't know if it's the Roslyn one or the C# one or what, but they have a board, a projects board from GitHub that shows all the features that they're looking at from 6, 7, but then also like 8, 8x, x dot something or other that they don't know. And they have a whole list of them. They're prioritizing and like working this board. In fact, when I was looking at it, things were moving. So somebody from the C# team was actually starting to move these things around. It's like, wow, that's cool. Okay. So these are just a couple of them that have been talked about. There's more, but I think these are cool. The source generators one, this is actually kind of hard to grok with the slide that I have here. It's from their documentation on this. They actually did a prototype of it and it works. Essentially what source generators are is a way to, wow, that really sucks if that's in the way there. Okay, yes, we know recording is started. Well, but source generators is kind of a way to do metaprogramming. So I want to be able to, instead of me implementing I notify property change, I want to do something where I can attribute a class and it generates source code for me that wraps around my code to do all that for me. So the way that this was proposed is to introduce some words called replace and original. So you could replace the original code and wrap it with what you wanted to do. And this would also work with partials. This has never been surfaced in C#. I love metaprogramming. And as soon as I saw this like 4 or 5 years ago, I'm like, I so want this. But the biggest problem with this is apparently the tooling. They actually do this in the compiler is not too bad, but tooling to help you reason as a developer, like if I'm debugging this, what code am I actually going into and where am I going to debug into and where am I not? What's actually being generated and what was it the generator as a generator can get really messy in a hurry. Okay, so I just hope at some point they have some notion of metaprogramming. Is that a moth? God, that's gonna strike. There's like a little moth. Bugs everywhere in here. Records. That's what it's supposed to say there. Records. So F# has records. The F# people love to talk about how they have records. They love to talk about how they have everything that C# ever wanted. But records is one of them. And if you've done POCOs, it's like, yes, I would love to have this. The idea is to do something like a data class, where that would actually generate something that looks like this. So I'd actually have my property set there and my constructors, and I have a deconstruct method made for me so I could do that. But notice I still have the data there. So what that would really turn into is something like this. So instead of you writing all this crap, you could just say data class point, and it would write something like that. Okay. So does that look kind of cool? Yeah, just not. Because yes, this would be really cool in a lot of cases. Devil's in details though, because you'll see like a comment here. Generated equality. Well, how do you determine like how this is equal? Do you want developers to be able to define them? Okay. What about what they call withers? So if I created a record, a point, then I created a new point, and then I want to create another point based off that point, except I wanted X to be 5. Well, this doesn't work because what happens if your record has been defined as being immutable? So you can't do this with mutable types. But maybe they'll change that for records and say this is okay. And I could have a wither, that's what they literally call them, these are withers, to say I want a new point that is basically X is 5 and Y is 4. But this would work in terms of constructing the new type value. Can you do inheritance with records? These are all things that at first glance, you might say, I don't care, but when you actually really ask people, what do you want or what do you don't want? It's kind of like tabs versus spaces. You start getting some very passionate people saying, yes, I want to be able to inherit from records. No, I don't want that. That's ridiculous. And that stuff matters. This has been going around for a long time within C#. Maybe with C#9 they'll get there. This one is really kind of a mind twister. Roles and extensions. There's other issues out there on the GitHub site. You talk about higher kind of types, extending the type system. Monads comes into play because, of course, you have, if you want to sound impressive, you have to say the word monad. But it's trying to take the type system in C# and extend it and make it much more powerful. So you notice here, interfaces where we have overloaded static operators on whatever the generic type is, which is like, that's nothing of what you can do right now. And the reason why you could do this is then I could actually do generic coding on primitive types like ints and widths, as long as they have an overloaded add and they have a 0 as a property, then I could do code like this. Or maybe this is like extension everything. And within a scope of, like, we have an extension method, and you have a using statement. Maybe somehow you can say within a block of code, as long as code within there, like int, I can extend the int within some using extension scope thingy and say, yep, they all are extended this way. So then I could actually do type safe code against value type arrays. So if none of that made sense, that's fine, because sometimes it doesn't even make sense to me. But what's cool about all these ideas is, again, it's taking that type system in C#, making it much more expressive, much more extendable. Okay, but that takes a fair amount of work. So if you ever have an idea, you go, wow, I'd really like C# to have this thing because I know I would want it. I don't care about the other million developers out there, but I want it. Don't fork the Roslyn compiler and force people at your company to use your version of C#. And please, 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 please don't do that. Because I see some people are going, oh, I could do that. Don't, because we don't need 20 million versions of C#. If you want to experiment, go right ahead, that's fine. But if you really think there's a feature that could be very, very helpful for other C# developers, you can add that. Understand that you should go through a process to see if that feature could get added. Okay? And that's all documented here. Don't just say, here's a feature, here's my PR, now accept it. They will immediately reject it out, even if it's a very cool feature. They need to make absolutely sure that it is something that is worth the time from that point on to support for millions of developers. So there's a big cost there involved. So you have to make sure that you go through that correctly. If the feature that you would think of actually touches anything with method overloading, you actually have to include, I think there's 2 people by default that will get included on the whole work that you need to do for adding a new feature in C#, at least 2. They will add at least 2 more if you have to do anything with method overloading, because it is that complicated. You may not think method overloading is a big deal, but there are some really, really wicked corner cases that come up if in certain things that you do with method overloading. Okay, so that would really need a lot of eyes on it. But it has happened. I mentioned that expression body members or methods is something that I really, really like to do, but that originally was just for methods. You can do that now for constructors, properties, I think events as well. But the point is that the community said, hey, we want this for more than just methods. So that feature, expression body members, is actually something that wasn't done directly through Microsoft. People outside in the community did all the work, added the PR, went through the process, and added that feature to C#. So it is possible. Okay? And wouldn't that be cool if not only you just like fixed a little bug in C#, we actually added a feature? I personally would find that to be really cool. I also think that would be really, really time consuming to do that as well. Yeah. So that's all I've got for my presentation. I'm going to be here for a while, years later apparently. So if you want to come on to that, that's fine. If you have any other questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, that's all I have. So thank you for having me. Does anybody else have any questions other than that guy?